At 6:47 a.m. on a cold November morning, a housekeeper stood trembling in the marble hallway of a $12 million estate, tears streaming down her face as she watched her employer walk toward the front door. Her voice cracked as she whispered the words that would haunt her for months to come. "Please, sir, don't go to that meeting. I'm begging you." He didn't even turn around. The heavy oak door closed behind him with a sound that felt like the sealing of a tomb. 43 minutes later, his phone went dark. His car disappeared from every tracker, and by nightfall, one of the most powerful men in American business had vanished without a trace. What did a woman earning $9 an hour know that a billionaire businessman with a team of security experts didn't? Why would she risk everything, including her job, to stop him from attending what seemed like a routine business meeting? And when investigators finally pieced together what really happened that day, they discovered something that would change everything we thought we knew about loyalty, trust, and the invisible people who see our lives more clearly than we see ourselves. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This is the story of Marcus Sullivan and Elena Ramirez, two people from completely different worlds whose lives became intertwined in a way that neither of them could have predicted. Marcus was 56 years old, the founder and CEO of Sullivan Technologies, a company worth over $2 billion that specialized in cybersecurity software for Fortune 500 companies. He lived alone in a sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of house that appeared in architecture magazines with its floor-to-ceiling windows, imported Italian marble, and a wine cellar that cost more than most people's homes. He had built his empire from nothing, starting with a single computer in his college dorm room and turning it into one of the most respected tech companies on the East Coast. But success had come at a price. His marriage had ended 8 years earlier. His 2 adult children rarely called. He worked 16-hour days, attended endless meetings, and slept in hotel rooms more often than his own bed. To the outside world, Marcus Sullivan had everything. To anyone who looked closer, he was a man who had traded his life for his legacy. Elena Ramirez was 29 years old, a single mother working 2 jobs to support her 6-year-old daughter, Sophia. She cleaned houses during the day and worked as a waitress 3 nights a week at a diner off Interstate 95. She had immigrated to the United States from Guatemala 7 years earlier, carrying nothing but a backpack and a promise to her dying mother that she would give Sophia the opportunities she never had. Elena spoke English with a heavy accent that some people mistook for lack of intelligence, but she had a sharp mind and an even sharper eye for detail. She noticed things that others missed. The way someone's voice changed when they lied, the tension in a room before an argument erupted, the small inconsistencies that revealed when something wasn't quite right. It was this ability, this gift for reading between the lines, that would eventually save a man's life and nearly destroy her own in the process. Elena started working for Marcus in late September, hired through a housekeeping agency that serviced the wealthiest neighborhoods in Fairfield County. She came to his house 3 times a week, arriving at 7 in the morning and leaving by 3 in the afternoon. Her job was simple: keep the house clean, do the laundry, prepare simple meals when requested, and stay invisible. That last part was never stated explicitly, but Elena understood it the moment she walked through the door. Wealthy people didn't want to see their housekeepers. They wanted the work done quietly, efficiently, and without any reminder that another human being was scrubbing their toilets and folding their underwear. So Elena learned to move through the house like a ghost, timing her cleaning around Marcus's schedule, slipping in and out of rooms so seamlessly that sometimes he seemed surprised when he encountered her in the hallway, as if he had forgotten she existed at all. But here's what Marcus didn't understand about invisible people. They see everything. Elena saw the empty whiskey bottles in his office trash can, always the same expensive brand, always 3 or 4 by the end of the week. She saw the prescription bottles lined up in his bathroom cabinet, medications for anxiety, for insomnia, for high blood pressure. She saw the framed photographs of his children that he had turned face down on his nightstand, as if looking at them caused too much pain. She heard his phone conversations through closed doors, the way his voice would shift from confident to defensive, from warm to ice-cold, depending on who was on the other end of the line. She noticed when he stopped eating the meals she prepared, when he started coming home later and later, when the dark circles under his eyes became permanent fixtures on his face, and she noticed, more than anything, when the visitors started arriving at odd hours, always through the side entrance, always when he thought no one was watching. It started in mid-October, about 3 weeks after Elena began working at the house. She was upstairs changing the linens in the guest bedroom when she heard voices coming from Marcus's study on the first floor. One voice was his, calm and measured as always. The other voice was unfamiliar, deeper, with an edge of aggression that made the hair on the back of Elena's neck stand up. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the tone, and the tone told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a friendly conversation. This was a confrontation. When she came downstairs 20 minutes later, Marcus was alone in the kitchen, pouring himself a drink even though it wasn't even noon. His hand was shaking. "Everything okay, Mr. Sullivan?" she asked quietly. He looked at her as if he had forgotten she was in the house. "Fine," he said, his voice clipped. "Just business." But Elena had cleaned enough houses for enough wealthy people to know what just business looked like. And this wasn't it. The visits continued over the next few weeks, always unexpected, always leaving Marcus in a state of barely controlled tension. Sometimes the visitors were men in expensive suits who spoke in low voices and left thick manila envelopes on his desk. Sometimes it was a single person who stayed for hours, long enough that Elena would find 2 glasses and an empty bottle of scotch in the study after they left. Marcus never introduced her to any of these people. He never acknowledged their presence. But Elena saw them coming and going, and she began to piece together a picture that deeply unsettled her. These weren't business partners. These weren't friends. These were people who had power over Marcus, people who could walk into his house uninvited and leave him looking like a man who had just been threatened. On November 7th, exactly 2 weeks before the meeting that would change everything, Elena found something that confirmed her worst suspicions. She was cleaning Marcus's study, dusting the bookshelves and emptying the trash, when she noticed a document left open on his desk. She knew she shouldn't look. She knew that reading her employer's private papers was grounds for immediate termination. But something about the way the document was positioned, as if it had been left in haste or thrown down in anger, made her pause. The header at the top of the page read, "Confidential Settlement Agreement." Below that were columns of numbers, dollar amounts so large that Elena had to count the zeros twice to make sure she was reading them correctly. $15 million, $22 million, $8.5 million. Next to each amount was a name, some she recognized from the news, others completely unfamiliar. At the bottom of the page, in red ink, someone had written a single word, "insufficient." Elena's heart was pounding as she carefully repositioned the document exactly as she had found it. She didn't fully understand what she was looking at, but she understood enough. Marcus was involved in something that required massive amounts of money to make disappear. Whether it was a lawsuit, a scandal, or something worse, she couldn't say, but the word "insufficient" told her that whatever he was trying to fix, he didn't have the resources to fix it. And that made him vulnerable. That made him desperate. And desperate people, in Elena's experience, were the most dangerous kind. She finished cleaning the study in silence, her mind racing with questions she knew she would never ask out loud. What could you possibly say to a billionaire about the secrets you discovered while emptying his trash? How do you warn someone that they might be in danger when you're not even sure what the danger is? So Elena did what she had always done. She stayed quiet. She stayed invisible. And she watched. The pattern continued for another week. More visitors. More closed-door conversations. More nights when Marcus didn't come home until after midnight, his tie loosened and his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion or alcohol or both. Elena began to dread coming to work, not because the job was difficult, but because the atmosphere in the house had become suffocating. It felt like standing in a building right before an earthquake, that moment when the air goes still and every instinct in your body screams that something terrible is about to happen. She thought about quitting, about finding another job through the agency, but she couldn't afford to lose the income. Sophia needed new shoes. The rent was due in 2 weeks, and jobs that paid $9 an hour plus tips weren't exactly easy to come by, especially for someone without legal documentation. So she stayed, and she watched, and she waited for whatever was coming. On November 19th, 6 days before the fateful meeting, Elena arrived at the house to find Marcus sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing the same clothes he had worn the day before. His hair was disheveled. His eyes were unfocused. There was an empty bottle of whiskey on the counter and a half-eaten sandwich on a plate that looked like it had been sitting there for hours. "Mr. Sullivan," Elena said softly, setting down her cleaning supplies. "Are you okay?" He looked up at her with an expression that made her chest tighten. It was the look of a man who had run out of options. "Elena," he said, his voice hoarse, "do you believe in second chances?" The question caught her off guard. She had worked for Marcus for nearly 2 months, and this was the first time he had asked her anything personal. The first time he had addressed her as anything other than the person who cleaned his house. "I do," she said carefully. "I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of trying?" He said, "Big ones. The kind that don't go away just because you're sorry." Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She just stood there, waiting, giving him space to say whatever he needed to say. "There's a meeting on the 25th, he continued, his eyes fixed on the table. "With some people I owe money to. A lot of money. More than I have." Elena's pulse quickened. "What happens if you don't have it?" Marcus laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "That's the question, isn't it?" He stood up, swaying slightly, and walked to the window that overlooked the backyard. "Interest. Walk away from everything I built." He turned to look at her, and Elena saw something in his eyes that terrified her. It was resignation. It was defeat. "But I can't do that. I can't just hand over my life's work to people who'll strip it for parts and sell it to the highest bidder." "Then don't go," Elena said. The words came out before she could stop them. Marcus shook his head. "It's not that simple. If I don't show up, they'll take everything anyway. At least if I'm there, I have a chance to negotiate, to buy myself some time." "And if they don't want to negotiate?" Elena asked. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence that stretched between them was answer enough. That conversation haunted Elena for the next 6 days. The tonsos, she tried to push it out of her mind, to tell herself that this wasn't her problem, that she was just the housekeeper, and whatever Marcus was involved in was way above her pay grade. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was going to happen at that meeting. She had seen enough crime dramas and news reports to know that when powerful people felt threatened, they didn't always resolve their problems through legal channels. And Marcus, for all his wealth and success, looked like a man who had been backed into a corner by people who were far more dangerous than he was. She thought about calling the police, but what would she even say? That her boss was acting strange? That he had mentioned a meeting with people he owed money to? None of that was a crime. None of that would prompt any kind of investigation, and if she was wrong, if she made a fuss over nothing, she would lose her job and probably get blacklisted from every housekeeping agency in the county. So she stayed silent. But she didn't stop watching. On November 24th, the day before the meeting, Elena arrived at the house to find a black SUV parked in the driveway. She recognized it as Marcus's company vehicle, the one he used for business trips, armored and equipped with GPS tracking and emergency communication systems. The sight of it made her stomach drop. He was preparing to go to the meeting. It was really going to happen. She let herself in through the side door, as usual, and immediately heard raised voices coming from the study. One voice was Marcus. The other belonged to someone she didn't recognize, a man with a thick New York accent and a tone that suggested he was used to getting his way. "You don't have a choice in this, Marcus," the man was saying. "You show up tomorrow at 10 a.m., you sign the documents, and you walk away clean. No lawsuits. No investigations. No one needs to know about the offshore accounts or the missing funds or any of the other mistakes you've made." "Those weren't mistakes," Marcus shot back. "That was fraud committed by my CFO without my knowledge, and you know it." "Doesn't matter what I know," the man said. "What matters is what I can prove. And right now, I can prove enough to put you in prison for 15 years. So, you'll show up tomorrow, or I'll make one phone call and your life as you know it is over." Elena stood frozen in the hallway, her heart hammering in her chest. She had heard too much, way too much. If either of these men knew she was in the house, if they realized she had been standing there listening, she didn't know what would happen to her. Slowly, carefully, she backed toward the door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip her keys. She made it outside without being seen, climbed into her car, and sat there for 10 minutes, trying to decide what to do. Every instinct told her to drive away and never come back, to call the agency and quit, to put as much distance as possible between herself and whatever was about to happen to Marcus Sullivan. But then she thought about the way he had looked at her in the kitchen 6 days ago, the desperate, defeated look of a man who had no one else to turn to, and she thought about Sophia, her daughter, and what she would want Elena to do if she was ever in trouble, if she was ever in a situation where one person's decision could make the difference between life and death. Would she want that person to walk away, or would she want them to try, even if trying meant risking everything? Elena sat in her car for another 5 minutes, arguing with herself, weighing the danger against the possibility that she might be wrong, that maybe this was just a business dispute that would resolve itself without anyone getting hurt. But deep in her gut, in that place where instinct lives, she knew the truth. This meeting wasn't about signing documents or negotiating terms. This meeting was a trap, and if Marcus showed up tomorrow, he might not come home. She made her decision. She would warn him, not today, while that man was still in the house, but tomorrow morning, before he left. She would tell him everything she had heard, everything she suspected, and then let him make his own choice. If he ignored her, if he thought she was overreacting or being dramatic, that was his decision to make. But at least she would know she tried. At least she would know she didn't stay silent when silence could cost someone their life. That night, Elena barely slept. She kept replaying the conversation she had overheard, trying to make sense of all the pieces. Offshore accounts, missing funds, fraud, prison. These were words that belonged in movies and true crime podcasts, not in the life of a housekeeper trying to pay her rent and put food on the table. But here she was, caught in the middle of something that felt like it was spinning out of control, something that could explode at any moment and take her down with it. She thought about calling Marcus's children, the ones in the photographs he had turned face down. Maybe they could talk sense into him. Maybe they could convince him to skip the meeting and hire lawyers instead. But she didn't have their contact information, and even if she did, what would she say? That their estranged father was in trouble? Or worse, they would think she was trying to scam them somehow, the immigrant housekeeper calling with a sob story designed to manipulate them into giving her money. At 5:30 a.m. on November 25th, Elena gave up on sleep entirely. She got Sophia ready for school, packed her lunch, kissed her goodbye, and promised they would go to the park that weekend if the weather was nice. Then she drove to Greenwich, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. She had rehearsed what she was going to say a dozen times in her head, but now that the moment was here, all those carefully planned words seemed inadequate. How do you tell someone they're walking into danger? How do you convince them to trust you when you're just the person who cleans their house, someone they barely notice, someone whose name they sometimes forget? She parked in the driveway at 6:30 a.m., a full half hour before she was supposed to start work. The house was dark, except for a single light, glowing in Marcus's bedroom window on the second floor. He was awake. He was getting ready. Time was running out. Elena let herself in through the side door and stood in the kitchen, listening. She could hear footsteps upstairs, the sound of a shower running, the muffled thump of someone moving around. She waited, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. At 6:42 a.m., Marcus came down the stairs, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, his hair still damp from the shower. He was holding his phone in one hand and a leather briefcase in the other. He said, "I need to talk to you," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's important." Marcus glanced at his watch. "Can it wait? I have a meeting in less than an hour, and traffic on 95 is going to be brutal." "No," Elena said, taking a step toward him. "It can't wait. Please, Mr. Sullivan. I need you to listen to me." Something in her tone must have gotten through to him, because he set down the briefcase and looked at her with actual attention, the first time in weeks that he had really seen her as a person rather than just part of the background. "Okay," he said. "I'm listening." Elena took a deep breath and told him everything. She told him about the conversations she had overheard, about the document she had seen on his desk, about the man who had come to the house yesterday and threatened him with prison. She told him that she believed the meeting he was about to attend was dangerous, that the people he was going to meet were not interested in negotiation, that they wanted something from him that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with control. She told him that she was terrified for him, that every instinct in her body was screaming that if he got in that car and drove to that meeting, something terrible would happen. And when she was finished, when she had said everything she needed to say, "Don't go to that meeting. I'm begging you." For a long moment, Marcus just stared at her. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the tired, bitter smile of someone who had heard this all before, someone who had already made up his mind and wasn't interested in changing it. "Elena," he said gently, "I appreciate your concern. I really do. But you don't understand the situation. These are businessmen. Aggressive, yes. Unpleasant, absolutely. But they're not going to hurt me. They need me to sign documents. They need me alive and functional." "You don't know that," Elena said, her voice breaking. "You can't know that for sure." "I know enough," Marcus said. He picked up his briefcase and walked toward the front door. "We can talk then if you're still worried." Elena followed him into the hallway, desperation making her bold. "What if you're wrong?" she said. "What if they don't just want your signature? What if they want you gone?" Marcus paused with his hand on the doorknob. For just a second, she thought he might reconsider, but then he shook his head and pulled the door open. "Lock up when you leave," he said, and then he was gone. Elena stood in the empty hallway, listening to the sound of his car engine starting, the crunch of gravel as he pulled out of the driveway, the fading hum as he drove away down the street. She felt like she was going to be sick. She had tried. She had warned him, and he had ignored her. What was she supposed to do now? Call the police and tell them what? That her boss went to a business meeting? That he ignored the concerns of his housekeeper? They would laugh at her. They would tell her to mind her own business and hang up. So Elena did the only thing she could do. She pulled out her phone, opened a new note, and typed out everything she had told Marcus, every detail she could remember about the visitors, the conversations, the documents, the threats. She added the date and time, the address of the house, and Marcus's full name. Then she saved it and prayed she would never need to use it. The morning passed in a blur. Elena tried to clean the house, tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering back to Marcus and that meeting. Where was it? Who was he meeting with? Was he okay? At 10:15 a.m., she checked her phone for the 100th time, half expecting to see a text message from Marcus telling her everything was fine, that she had worried for nothing. But there was nothing. At 11:30 a.m., still nothing. By 1 p.m., Elena's anxiety had transformed into full-blown panic. The meeting should have been over hours ago. He should have called. He should have texted. He should have done something to let her know he was okay, unless he wasn't okay, unless something had happened exactly the way she feared it would. At 2:47 p.m., Elena's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. She answered it with trembling hands. "Hello? Is this Elena Ramirez?" A man's voice asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Detective James Morrison with the Greenwich Police Department. I'm calling about Marcus Sullivan. We understand you work for him?" Elena's legs went weak. She sat down on the edge of Marcus's couch, her vision tunneling. "Yes," she managed to say. "I'm his housekeeper. Is he okay?" "What happened?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of pause that comes before bad news. Mr. Sullivan's vehicle was found abandoned on Route 15 approximately 2 hours ago. The GPS system had been manually disabled. There's no sign of Mr. Sullivan himself, and we haven't been able to reach him on his phone. We're treating this as a potential abduction or missing persons case. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Abduction, missing persons. All the things she had feared, all the warnings she had given, they were coming true. "I tried to stop him," Elena heard herself saying, her voice distant and strange in her own ears. "I told him not to go. I begged him, but he didn't listen." "You told him not to go where?" Detective Morrison asked, his tone sharpening with interest. "To the meeting with the people he owed money to. I heard them threatening him. I heard everything." What happened over the next 48 hours would become a blur in Elena's memory, a nightmare sequence of police stations and interrogation rooms, and questions that seemed to go on forever. She told the detectives everything she knew, showed them the notes she had typed on her phone, described the visitors she had seen coming and going from Marcus's house. She gave them dates, times, physical descriptions, anything that might help them find him. But instead of treating her as a helpful witness, the detectives began treating her as a suspect. They wanted to know why she had been eavesdropping on private conversations, why she had been reading documents on Marcus's desk. They asked about her immigration status, about her finances, about whether Marcus had ever given her gifts or money beyond her regular paycheck. They wanted to know if she had gambling debts, if she had family members in trouble, if she had any connection to the people who might have taken Marcus. The questions came fast and relentless, designed to break her down, to make her contradict herself, to find any crack in her story that might suggest she was involved in whatever had happened to him. By the third day, Elena's face was all over the news. "Housekeeper under suspicion in Billionaire's disappearance," read one headline. "Did Maid know too much?" read another. Someone had leaked her name and photograph to the media, and suddenly Elena found herself at the center of a story she had desperately tried to prevent. Reporters camped outside her apartment building. Her phone rang constantly with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Sophia came home from school crying because the other kids had said her mother was a criminal. Elena's other employer, the family she cleaned for on Tuesdays and Thursdays, called to let her know they wouldn't be needing her services anymore. The diner where she worked nights told her not to come back until the situation with Marcus was resolved. In the span of 72 hours, Elena lost both her jobs, her privacy, and her reputation, all because she had tried to do the right thing. On the fourth day, Detective Morrison called her back in for another interview. Elena sat across from him in the same sterile interrogation room where she had spent hours answering the same questions over and over again, and she wondered if this was the moment they were going to arrest her. But instead, the detective slid a manila folder across the table toward her. "We've been investigating Mr. Sullivan's business dealings," he said, "and we've uncovered some interesting information. It turns out that several weeks ago, Marcus began gathering evidence against members of his own board of directors, evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. He was planning to turn it over to the FBI. Elena's mind raced. So the people who took him, they were trying to stop him? "We don't think anyone took him," Detective Morrison said. We think Marcus Sullivan staged his own disappearance. Elena stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. What? What? The GPS on his vehicle wasn't disabled by an outside party. It was disabled from inside the car, using a code that only Marcus had access to. The meeting he attended that morning, it wasn't with the people who had been threatening him. It was with a private security firm that specializes in witness protection for civilians. We have phone records, email correspondence, everything. Marcus knew his life was in danger. We can another noted, and subended, we found 41, but the Gensan. He knew that the people on his board would do anything to stop him from exposing them, so he disappeared. He's in hiding somewhere, waiting for the FBI to build their case so he can come forward safely. Elena felt like the room was spinning. But why didn't he tell me? Why did he let me think something terrible had happened? Because you weren't supposed to know, Detective Morrison said. No one was. The whole point was to make it look like an abduction, to throw his enemies off the trail while he stayed hidden. But you complicated things. You heard too much. You knew too much. And when you told us everything you knew, you inadvertently gave us the information we needed to figure out what really happened. So, I'm not a suspect? Elena asked, hardly daring to believe it. No, Detective Morrison said. You're not a suspect. You're a witness. And according to Marcus, you may have saved his life. He pulled out another document from the folder, a handwritten letter. This arrived at the station this morning. It's from Marcus. He wanted you to have it. Elena took the letter with shaking hands and read the words written in Marcus's distinctive handwriting. Elena, I'm sorry for putting you through this. I'm sorry for not listening when you tried to warn me. The truth is, I did listen. Your warning made me realize that I couldn't face those people alone, that I needed help from professionals who could protect me while I gathered enough evidence to bring them down. I staged my disappearance to buy time, but I never intended for you to become caught up in the investigation. You were right about everything. The meeting was dangerous. The people threatening me were willing to go to any length to protect their secrets. If I had shown up alone, without a plan, I probably wouldn't have survived. Because of you, I'm still alive. Because of you, justice is going to be served. I can never repay you for that. But I've set up a trust fund for your daughter, Sophia. I've also transferred ownership of a small house in Norwalk into your name, a place where you and your daughter can live without worrying about rent. Consider it a small gesture of gratitude from someone who finally understands the value of listening to the people who see the truth, even when we refuse to. You were never invisible to me, Elena. You were the only one who cared enough to try to save me when everyone else either wanted to use me or destroy me. Thank you. Marcus. Elena read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, unable to fully comprehend what it meant. A future that didn't involve working 2 jobs and scraping by on $9 an hour. But more than that, something else. Recognition, acknowledgement, the understanding that her voice mattered, that her instincts had been right, that she was more than just the invisible woman who cleaned someone else's house. She looked up at Detective Morrison, who was watching her with something that might have been sympathy. When will he come back? She asked. When it's safe, the detective said. When the FBI has enough evidence to make arrests. Could be weeks, could be months. But he will come back. And when he does, he'll testify. He'll tell the truth. And the people who tried to destroy him will face justice. 6 months later, Elena stood in the living room of her new house in Norwalk, watching Sophia play in the backyard through the kitchen window. The house wasn't large, just 3 bedrooms and a single bathroom, but it was theirs. No landlord, no rent, no fear of eviction. The trust fund Marcus had set up paid for Sophia's private school tuition, her health insurance, and provided a modest monthly stipend that meant Elena only needed to work 1 job instead of 2. She had taken a position as a house manager for an elderly widow in Darien, a woman who treated her with respect and paid her a living wage, and actually asked about her life, about Sophia, about her dreams for the future. It wasn't a perfect life. Elena still had nightmares sometimes about those 72 hours when she thought she might be arrested, when her face was on the news, and strangers called her a criminal. But the nightmares were getting less frequent. And every morning when she woke up in her own house, in a bed that belonged to her, she reminded herself of what she had learned through all of this. The lesson was simple but profound. Sometimes the most invisible people see the most dangerous things, and sometimes speaking up when it would be easier to stay silent is the difference between life and death. Marcus did come back, eventually. 8 months after his disappearance, after the FBI had arrested 6 members of his board of directors on charges of embezzlement and conspiracy to commit fraud, after the news cycle had moved on to other scandals and other billionaires in trouble, Marcus returned to Greenwich. The first thing he did was visit Elena at her new house. He looked thinner than she remembered, older, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. But he also looked lighter somehow, as if a weight he had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. They sat in Elena's small kitchen, drinking coffee, and talked about everything that had happened. Marcus told her about the months he spent in hiding, about the fear and the isolation and the constant worry that the people he was trying to expose would find him before the FBI could build their case. Elena told him about the nightmare of being suspected, about losing her jobs and her reputation, about the way Sophia had cried when kids at school called her mother a criminal. "I'll never be able to make that right," Marcus said quietly. "I'll never be able to give you back those months or erase what you went through." "Did more than enough," Elena said. "You gave us a home. You gave us security. You gave us a future. You saved my life, Elena. You saw what was happening when no one else did. You tried to stop me from making a mistake that would have gotten me killed. And then, when I disappeared, you told the police everything you knew, even though it made you look suspicious, even though it put you in danger. That kind of courage, that kind of integrity, it's rare, and it should be rewarded with more than just money." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I've been thinking about this for months," he said, "about what I could do that would actually mean something. And I realized that the best thing I could give you is a choice. Inside this envelope is a job offer. I'm rebuilding my company from the ground up, with new leadership and new values. I need someone to run corporate security, someone who has good instincts and isn't afraid to speak up when something doesn't feel right. Someone like you. The salary is $120,000 a year, plus benefits. You'd have to get some training, some certifications, but I'd pay for all of that. The job is yours if you want it." Elena stared at the envelope, her mind reeling. $120,000 a year. That was more money than she had ever imagined making. That was the kind of salary that could change everything for her and Sophia. But it was also a corporate job, the kind of position that required a college degree and professional experience, neither of which she had. "Marcus," she said slowly, "I'm just a housekeeper. I don't know anything about corporate security." "You know more than you think," Marcus said. "You know how to observe. You know how to listen. You know how to see patterns and connections that other people miss. Those are the most important skills in security work, and they can't be taught. Everything else, the technical knowledge, the legal requirements, that's all stuff you can learn. But the instinct, the ability to know when something is wrong before anyone else does, that's something you're born with. And you have it." Elena picked up the envelope but didn't open it. She thought about Sophia, about the life she wanted to give her daughter. She thought about all the years she had spent being invisible, cleaning other people's houses, watching other people's lives from the outside. She thought about the moment she decided to speak up, to warn Marcus, even though she knew he might not listen, even though she knew it could cost her everything, and she realized that Marcus was right. She did have good instincts. She did know how to see things that others missed. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. Maybe it was time to use those skills for something bigger than just surviving day to day. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I ask," Marcus replied. 3 weeks later, Elena accepted the job offer. Security, working with former FBI agents and cybersecurity experts who taught her about threat assessment, risk management, and corporate investigations. It was harder than anything she had ever done. There were days when she felt completely out of her depth, when the technical jargon and complex procedures made her wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. But there were also moments when everything clicked, when her instincts aligned perfectly with her training, when she could look at a situation and immediately identify the weak points, the potential threats, the warning signs that others overlooked. Her instructors were impressed. Marcus was vindicated. And Elena, for the first time in her adult life, felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. A year after Marcus's disappearance, the trial of the 6 board members began. Elena was called to testify about what she had seen and heard during those final weeks before Marcus went into hiding. She sat in the witness box, facing defense attorneys who tried to paint her as an unreliable witness, as someone who had misunderstood what she heard, as someone with ulterior motives. But Elena had spent months preparing for this moment. She had worked with prosecutors to organize her testimony, to present the facts clearly and calmly, to let the evidence speak for itself. She described the visitors, the threatening conversations, the documents she had seen. She explained how she had tried to warn Marcus, how she had begged him not to go to that meeting, and she told the jury about the moment she realized that sometimes the most important thing you can do is speak up, even when no one wants to listen, even when it costs you everything. The trial lasted 6 weeks. In the end, all 6 defendants were convicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. They received prison sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. Marcus's company, Sullivan Technologies, underwent a complete restructuring under new leadership. And Elena, who had started as a housekeeper, earning $9 an hour, became the director of corporate security for a $2 billion company responsible for protecting both the business and the people who worked there. She never forgot where she came from. She never forgot what it felt like to be invisible, to have her voice dismissed, to be treated as less important simply because of her job title or her accent or the color of her skin. And she made it her mission to ensure that in this company, under her watch, everyone's voice would be heard. The security guard who noticed something unusual, the janitor who overheard a concerning conversation, the receptionist who got a bad feeling about a visitor. Elena created channels for people to report their concerns without fear of being ignored or dismissed. She built a culture where observation and instinct were valued just as much as credentials and experience. Sophia grew up watching her mother transform, from someone who cleaned houses to someone who protected entire companies. She learned that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and speaking up anyway. She learned that your circumstances don't define your worth, and that sometimes the people who seem the least powerful are the ones who change everything. When Sophia was 12, she asked Elena about that day, about the morning she begged Marcus not to go to the meeting. "Were you scared?" Sophia asked. "Terrified," Elena admitted. "I thought I was going to lose my job. I thought he would think I was crazy. I almost didn't say anything." "But you did," Sophia said. "Why?" Elena thought about that question for a long time before answering. "Because I imagined what I would want someone to do if you were in danger someday. If you were making a decision that could get you hurt, and someone could see it but wasn't sure if they should speak up, I would want that person to be brave. I would want them to risk looking foolish or losing their job or whatever consequences they were afraid of. I would want them to try. So that's what I did. I tried." Marcus and Elena remained friends long after the trial ended, long after the media moved on to other stories, long after most people forgot about the billionaire who disappeared and the maid who tried to save him. They had lunch together once a month, usually at a small cafe halfway between Greenwich and Norwalk, and they talked about their lives, their struggles, their victories. Marcus never fully recovered from the betrayal of his board members, the people he had trusted to help him run his company. It changed him in fundamental ways. He became more cautious, more guarded, slower to trust. But he also became more present, more aware of the people around him, more willing to listen to voices he might have dismissed before. He reconnected with his children, who had watched the trial and the media coverage, and finally understood the pressure their father had been under for so many years. The relationship was still fragile, still complicated by years of absence and hurt feelings, but it was a relationship, which was more than they had before. Elena's life wasn't perfect either. There were still hard days, still moments when she doubted herself, still nights when the old nightmares crept back in. The media attention had died down, but it never fully went away. Every few months, some true crime podcast or documentary would revisit the case, and Elena would get calls from producers asking for interviews, asking her to relive the worst period of her life for entertainment. She always said no. She had told her story once, in the courtroom, under oath, where it mattered. She didn't need to tell it again for clicks and ratings. What mattered to her now was the life she was building, the example she was setting for Sophia, the work she was doing to make sure that other people who saw danger wouldn't be afraid to speak up about it. On the 2-year anniversary of Marcus's disappearance, Elena was invited to speak at a corporate security conference in New York City. The organizers wanted her to talk about threat recognition and the importance of listening to all employees, regardless of their position in the company. Elena had never spoken publicly before, had never stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people and shared her story. The idea terrified her. But Marcus encouraged her to do it. "Your story matters," he said. "Not just because of what happened to me, but because of what it represents. How many other people are out there right now, seeing something wrong, knowing something is dangerous, but staying silent because they don't think anyone will listen to them? How many lives could be saved if those people knew that their voice matters, that their instincts are valid, that speaking up is worth the risk? You have the power to change that. You have the power to give people permission to be brave." So Elena agreed to speak. She stood on that stage in New York City, looking out at an audience of security professionals and corporate executives and consultants, and she told them her story. She told them about being invisible, about seeing things that no one else saw because no one else was paying attention to the housekeeper. She told them about the fear she felt when she realized Marcus was walking into danger, about the choice she made to speak up even though she knew he might not listen. She told them about the consequences she faced, about being suspected and investigated and losing everything she had worked for, and she told them about what came after, about the vindication and the opportunity and the life she never imagined she could have. But mostly, she told them about the lesson she learned, the truth that had been confirmed over and over again throughout this entire experience. "The people you don't see are often the ones who see the most," Elena said, her voice steady and clear. Security guard who watches the cameras all night, the receptionist who greets every visitor, the maintenance worker who has access to every room in the building. These are the people who notice when something changes, when someone acts differently, when a pattern breaks. But they're also the people whose concerns get dismissed, whose warnings get ignored, whose instincts get overruled by people in positions of power who think they know better. I'm here to tell you that you can't afford to ignore those voices anymore. You can't afford to assume that someone's job title determines the value of their observations. Because the truth is, sometimes the person who saves your life, who stops a disaster, who prevents a catastrophe, is the person you never even noticed was in the room. The response to her speech was overwhelming. Elena received dozens of emails from people who had heard her speak, people who shared their own stories of seeing danger and not being believed, of speaking up and being dismissed, of choosing to stay silent because they didn't think anyone would listen. Many of them thanked her for giving them the courage to trust their instincts. Some of them told her about situations they had reported after hearing her speak, situations that turned out to be serious threats that were stopped because someone was finally paying attention. Elena kept those emails in a folder on her computer, and on the days when she felt like her work didn't matter, when she wondered if she had really made a difference, she would read through them and remember why she had chosen to be brave on that November morning 2 years ago. Marcus's company thrived under its new leadership. With the corrupt board members gone and a renewed focus on ethical business practices, Sullivan Technologies became a model for corporate governance and transparency. Marcus stepped back from day-to-day operations, taking on an advisory role that allowed him to focus on the things that mattered most to rebuilding his relationship with his children, supporting causes he believed in, and mentoring young entrepreneurs who were trying to build their own companies without compromising their values. He donated millions of dollars to organizations that supported immigrant workers, that provided legal assistance to people who couldn't afford it, that fought for labor rights and workplace safety. When reporters asked him why he had chosen those particular causes, he always gave the same answer: because I learned the hard way that the people with the least power in our society are often the ones with the most to teach us, and we need to start listening. 3 years after that November morning, Sophia was 13 years old and thriving in her private school. She had friends, good grades, and a confidence that Elena had never possessed at that age. She wanted to be a lawyer someday, she told her mother, because she wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves. Elena couldn't have been prouder. One evening, as they were sitting together doing homework at the kitchen table of the house that Marcus had given them, Sophia looked up from her textbook and asked a question that caught Elena off guard. "Mom, do you ever regret it? Warning Mr. Sullivan, I mean. Do you ever wish you had just stayed quiet and kept your job and avoided all the trouble?" Elena thought about the question carefully before answering, because she wanted to give her daughter an honest response, not just a convenient one. "Sometimes," she admitted, "there were moments during the investigation when I thought my life was over, when I thought I had made the biggest mistake I could possibly make. There were nights when I couldn't sleep because I was so scared of what might happen to us, of whether we would be okay. But even in those moments, even when I thought everything was falling apart, I never regretted trying to save him. Because the alternative, staying silent and then finding out that something terrible had happened that would have destroyed me in a different way. I would have spent the rest of my life wondering if I could have made a difference, if my warning could have saved him. And that kind of regret, the regret of not trying, that's so much worse than the consequences of speaking up." "But you lost your jobs," Sophia pointed out. "People thought you were a criminal. That must have been awful. And in the meantime, I learned something important. I learned that my voice matters, that my instincts are valid, that I don't have to be rich or powerful or educated to see the truth and speak it. That lesson, that knowledge, it's worth more than any job I lost. It changed everything for me. It changed everything for us." Sophia nodded slowly, processing this. "So, you're saying that doing the right thing is worth it even when it's hard?" "Because if it was easy, everyone would do it. It's the hard choices, the scary choices. Those are the ones that define who we are and what we stand for." As the years passed, the story of Elena and Marcus became something of a legend in corporate security circles, a cautionary tale about the importance of listening to all employees and a reminder that the most valuable intelligence often comes from unexpected sources. Elena was invited to speak at conferences around the country, to consult with companies on their security protocols, to train security teams on threat recognition and assessment. She became an expert in her field, respected and sought after, but she never forgot where she came from. She never forgot what it felt like to be the invisible woman cleaning someone's house, watching a disaster unfold and feeling powerless to stop it. That memory kept her humble, it kept her grounded, and it kept her committed to making sure that no one else would ever have to face that situation alone. Marcus eventually sold Sullivan Technologies to a larger firm for a sum that made headlines even in the world of tech billionaires. He used the money to establish a foundation focused on protecting whistleblowers and supporting workers who spoke up about corporate misconduct. Elena served on the board of directors, using her experience to shape the foundation's policies and programs. Together, they created resources for people who found themselves in the same position Elena had been in, seeing something wrong, knowing they should speak up, but terrified of the consequences. The foundation provided legal support, financial assistance, job placement services, and emotional counseling for people who lost their livelihoods because they chose truth over silence. It wasn't enough to fix every problem, to help every person who needed it, but it was something. It was a legacy built on the foundation of one woman's courage and one man's gratitude. Now, 5 years after that, November morning, Elena sometimes drives past the estate in Greenwich, where she used to work as a housekeeper. The house looks the same from the outside, still impressive with its marble and glass and manicured lawns. But everything inside has changed. Marcus sold the property 2 years ago, unable to live in a place that held so many painful memories. A new family lives there now, a couple with 3 young children and a nanny who probably has no idea about the drama that unfolded in those rooms. Elena doesn't feel sad when she drives past. She doesn't feel nostalgic or regretful. She feels grateful. Grateful for the experience that changed her life. Grateful for the courage she found when she needed it most. Grateful for the second chance that came from speaking truth to power, even when power wasn't ready to listen. And when people ask her now, as they often do, what she would say to someone who finds themselves in a similar situation, someone who sees danger but isn't sure if you should speak up, Elena's answer is always the same. Trust your instincts. Your fear is telling you something important. Yes, there might be consequences. Yes, you might lose something by speaking up. But the alternative, staying silent when you know something is wrong, that has consequences too. And those consequences, the ones that come from choosing silence over truth, those are the ones that stay with you forever. She pauses, thinking about that morning, about the trembling in her hands as she begged Marcus not to go, about the feeling of watching him drive away and thinking she had failed. In the end, she says, you have to be able to live with yourself. You have to be able to look in the mirror and know that when it mattered, when someone's life hung in the balance, you chose to be brave. That's worth more than any job, any reputation, any temporary comfort. That's the thing that defines who you are. So let me ask you, wherever you're watching this from, whatever situation you might be facing right now, if you knew something was wrong, if you saw danger approaching, if you had information that could save someone's life, would you speak up? Would you be brave, even when being brave might cost you everything? Would you trust your instincts, even when everyone else is telling you you're wrong? Think about Elena, standing in that marble hallway, watching her employer walk toward a meeting that could have killed him, knowing that her warning might not be enough but giving it anyway. Think about the choice she made, the courage she found, the life she built because she refused to stay silent. And ask yourself, what would you do? How would you respond? Because the truth is, we all face moments like this in our lives, moments when we have to choose between safety and truth, between comfort and courage. The question isn't whether those moments will come. The question is what we'll do when they arrive. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the invisible people in your own life who might be seeing things you're missing, if it reminded you that everyone's voice matters regardless of their job title or their bank account, then share it. Tell someone about Elena and Marcus. Tell them about the maid who saved a billionaire's life by trusting her instincts. Tell them that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply pay attention, listen to the warnings, and believe people when they tell you they're scared. Because that's the real lesson here. Not that housekeepers are secret heroes or that billionaires always get what they deserve, but that we're all connected in ways we don't fully understand. That the person you barely notice might be the one who saves your life. That the voice you're tempted to dismiss might be the one speaking the truth you most need to hear. Elena Ramirez understood that. Marcus Sullivan learned it the hard way. And now you know it too. Thank you for watching. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Would you have trusted Elena's warning? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between speaking up and staying silent? What did you do? Share your story with us. And if you found this video valuable, if it made you think or feel something important, subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things, about courage in unexpected places, about the power of listening to the voices that usually go unheard. Until next time, remember, Pay attention to the invisible people in your life. They might be seeing something you're missing, and their warning might be the thing that saves you.